Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. As everyone knows, in recent months, a lot of companies have been moving over to a remote strategy for a lot of reasons and for different companies. A lot of companies will stay remote long term. And what people don't realize is that staying long-term remote means that you have to have a deeper and stronger strategy to really be successful. Vertical has been remote for 4 years now. We've already done all of the trial and error. We've transitioned successfully, and we want to help you with that same great information. So we'll talk about all the steps that we took today, what we learn and take away, and share a little bit of other information too. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded. Please remember to keep yourself on mute, and if you have a question, enter it into the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. So first up here, we're going to introduce you to our host. First up, we'll have Kevin Butler. He's the VP of Marketing and Product here. He's been remote for 15 years. Next up, we're going to have Fran Blackburn. She's VP of Consultant Marketing, and she's been remote for 20 years. And then I will follow them up. My name is Rebecca Ward. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here, and I've been remote for 11 years. All right, Kevin, it's all yours.
Thanks, Rebecca. I really appreciate it. Had to find that mute button. So we're going to start off by talking about the long-term value of remote work, and then we'll get into figuring out what kind of tools we need for some of this stuff. We're going to look at how to, properly manage and inspire remote employees. It's just a very different world when you've got remote workforce than a workforce that's on site. And then we'll see some tips that our team has learned for setting up for success, how to work at home, and really try and give you all the different ways to make working remotely a successful process. But first, we start out with the long-term value of remote work. And one of the things to understand is we've all already moved remote. All of our different companies out there, the numbers look to be at this point to be about 63% of employees in the United States are working remotely. So everybody's there. Everybody is working that way. And, the interesting thing I find about that stat is that the University of Chicago said that about 60% of American jobs can't be done remotely, and yet 63% of people are now working remotely. So the definitions change over time. So there are a few different values that we see about working remotely. And the reason why this is important is, we might as well consider, if we've done all the hard work, we've gotten everyone remote, why don't we keep them there? Why don't we put people who are now working at home and see the benefits and the values of keeping people there? And a lot of people are considering it. This ranges from companies like Facebook, Google, Twilio, Twitter. All are considering keeping all of their staff remote. Financial companies like Square, Fidelity Information Systems are all considering it as well and talking about keeping their staffs not going back to the office, but staying at home. So there's a lot of a lot of values or reasons to do that. And let's look at a few of them. The first one to look at and consider is cost savings. There are some real costs to be saved here. This includes the value of real estate. Even before we saw the pandemic and people moving home in job lots, companies much bigger than Vertical, though we've done it as well, have saved huge amounts of money in real estate. Real estate's expensive. It's one of the largest items on people's books. And if you can reduce or eliminate real estate costs, now you're talking about millions of dollars of annual savings. So this can have real power to it. There's a lot of other costs that go along with this. If you think about if you remove the real estate, or even if you just reduce the size of space you've got, you can reduce the amount of supplies, everything from break room coffee to copy paper to supplies in the bathroom to the first aid kits that you find in every office that's regulatorily mandated. All of that can go away, and that can save thousands of dollars per year per individual employee. So there's a huge cost benefit here. And right now, with the way that the economy is turning and the fact that we have, 40 million people unemployed at the moment, the possibility of finding major cost savings within the company is a huge benefit. So this is a number one reason to consider just keeping people remote. There's hard dollars to be saved here, and we all need that at the moment. But it's not just that we can save money, it's that employees are more productive when they move home. They really are saving time and using that on being better workers. I mean, the first thing to understand is people aren't commuting, and commuting takes anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half a day on average per American employee. When AT&T moved people remote, they saw that people were working an average of 5 more hours a week in the office than the people that they kept in their office spaces. And part of that is simply, if I don't have to spend 45 minutes in the car driving to work, that's time that I can actually get started on working earlier. People tend to start earlier, they tend to finish later. People just end up putting more time in. Cardiff University did a study and found that 73% of remote workers put in more work just because they're at home. There are less distractions. You think there would be more, but think of all the things of having going to the conference room, having to have people stop by your cubicle, getting there. If you're just in a comfortable workspace, you can more easily transition to work from your personal life. So we've got workers who are going to be more productive, and we've been engaged in the world's largest experiment in remote work over the last couple of months, and those numbers continue to hold up. People are being more productive as they work at home, and people who've never worked remotely before have now had the opportunity to discover exactly how much more productive they are. So there's a huge value here. But another piece of this isn't just that people are working more individually. They don't have as much time away from work. The American Management Society looked at this and found that people who work at home return more quickly from serious medical issues, surgery, sickness, whatever, obviously very relevant right now. They don't tend to take off work for minor appointments and errands. They are able to work that into their day, so they don't have to take off a whole work day and say, hey, I'm not going to be in, I'm not going to do any work. Remote workers don't tend to call in sick not when they're not ill, but when other family members are ill, when the spouse, when the child, when other members that are in their household are ill. They're able to juggle that back and forth. And maybe that means in that case, on those days, they are providing a reduced productivity. But isn't that better than no productivity, than having them not there at all? So there's a balance to be struck here. The American Management Society study or Association study determined that this whole process resulted in 63% fewer absences from remote workers. That's a huge benefit. But the benefit extends beyond the individual person itself, because you also have the value that people who are sick staying at home don't infect other employees who continue to work. So you don't have a spread. Literally, this is about the most relevant thing I can say right now, considering why we've all been sitting at home. We are looking at restricting the spread of whether it's a horrible illness like the one we've been dealing with the coronavirus, or it's something as simple as the common cold. Getting fewer people in the office sick makes the entire office more productive. There are huge advantages to consider here, and it really makes a big difference. So really, if you think about it, what we want to consider here is we've put the people home. We've spent the money on the extra hardware. We've gotten them phones to send home. We've gotten them extra monitors. We've spent hundreds of dollars on additional equipment, headsets, and other things. We've done all the difficult work of figuring out new policies, figuring out how new work processes work with people at home, all of that kind of stuff. That's done. So now let's take the benefit. Let's consider just leaving the people there, because we've done all the hard work. We can save a lot of money in real estate. We can save a lot of money in reduced absenteeism. We can use more productive workers. So the question is, how do we do this? If you don't already know this one, there are some things that we can give you as some tips and tricks here. And one of the very first things to understand is the tool set that you're using. The solutions that you're using to do this, whether it be your UC solution, your Unified Communication solution like Vertical provides, whether it's your line of business software that you're using every day, whether it's just your storage and those kind of pieces, all of those solutions have to be absolutely reliable. Solution reliability is one of the critical pieces here. Because it's one of the #1 problems. With companies that were remote before this pandemic started, it was seen that 78% of people had technical problems collaborating with other workers. So that's a real problem. That's a major issue. This is the #1 thing that's holding people back. Are those technical problems? People having difficulty using their solutions in the remote workplace. So there's a few things that the solutions must have to avoid this. They've got to be highly reliable, and they need to have somebody proactively monitoring what's going on. Those solutions need to have regular testing regimes. What does that mean? That means somebody actually needs to be trying this stuff. If they say, oh yeah, we can fail over between our multiple data centers on both coasts of the United States. All right, how often do you do that? This is important to know, because if you don't actually test it, it doesn't really mean anything. It's not there. I have implemented enough backup systems in my entire life to know that you have to test or it's pointless. You need to have somebody who can help your remote workers, who's experienced in working with remote personnel, to answer their questions. This is one of those hardest ones. If your organization that is providing you support doesn't know what they're doing and isn't experienced with a remote environment and all the pitfalls, then that's going to be a real problem. And you need a solution more than anything else that's easy to use, because you're no longer having the ability to have the IT guy walk over, lean over their shoulder and go, oh, there's your problem. You have to move into a remote environment. It's tougher to see where the issue is. It's tougher to notice the problem may be that the person, every time they turn, is kicking the plug out of the wall, and that's what's causing their laptop battery problems. It's difficult to see. One of my classic stories ever is when I was back doing IT for the very first time back in school systems in Kentucky a long time ago. Person kept on complaining they were losing all their data. Well, it took standing in their classroom to notice that they had covered the side of their PC with kitchen magnets, with pictures and cool shapes and all that kind of stuff. So they'd magnetized their entire PC, which is, of course, going to wipe the data. There's no way you can know that without seeing that. So remote is harder to do. It's important to have the easiest software possible to use so you can eliminate as many of those problems as possible. And this is going to be the one little commercial I put in here. Vertical can help you with all this. We know which solutions are the best. We know these various bullet points I'm talking about. We've identified them, and that's who we tend to push for a customer. We know how to support remote workers because, as Rebecca said at the beginning, we've been working remote for years. So this is just our environment that we work on in every day. One of the key problems that we have experienced that we'll tell you about is network connectivity. There's nothing that's more crucial in being able to enable a remote worker than the network connectivity from their last mile out to the customer. Out to their services. So there's a few things you have to do here. You can't just leave it to the employee and say, oh, hey, you better have a good network connection. That's good. It's good to have a network assessment tool, something that you can email to the employee, they can run, and we can find out if there are problems in the first place. If there are problems, you may need to look at what alternative solutions there are out there. One of the ones that's really great is everybody's got cell wireless nowadays. The map of coverage for cell wireless and LTE service is actually really the best fast internet connection in the United States as far as coverage over the entire country. So that's one of those things to even consider. We can also talk about maybe for critical employees who have real problems, putting in SD-WAN solutions that will manage the network automatically, look for the best connection and do things to make sure that the connection is optimized. So there's a number of things to do, but don't just assume that the connection is going to be good and that the employee is responsible for providing a reliable connection. This has to be part of your plan to do this. But there's a separate concern that you hadn't had to think about before, which is the changing nature of security within the remote space. So when you're talking about this, you're all of a sudden changing the environment. It's not all within your network. You can't put all your eggs in one basket and then guard that basket. Now you've distributed your eggs all over the country. So the question is all your data encrypted? Are all the services you're using, whether it be cloud file storage, whether it be unified communication, a video meetings platform like we're using right now, is all the data encrypted? Is it at rest, in motion? Is it going to be safe? What data is stored locally? What gets kept on the individual user's computer, and what state is it kept in? And then the question becomes, how are devices stored at home? Are they always plugged in and logged in the employee's office space at home, or maybe it's just their kitchen table? Is it something that they have their kids jumping on to check something for homework? How is that working? Because you have to really think about a very different environment at this point. How are log in and log out policies enforced? Or, like I said, are they machines just sitting there logged in all day? Or are they automatically logged out when there's idle time? What's going on there? And then the final question is, we talked about the home network a moment ago. Not only do you have to look at speed and reliability, but what's the security of it? One of those lesser known kind of things is Verizon Fios is a service that I had for years in Maryland when I lived there. Yeah, I've lived a lot of places. And one of the things that appalled me was on any Verizon Fios connection, whether it was business or residential, there's a network interface device that sits usually on the outside of your house or outside of your apartment. And that network interface device has an Ethernet jack that anybody can walk up, plug into, and immediately see everything that's going on in your home network. All the traffic that's going in and out of your house, I can see without ever entering your house or being on site. Wi-Fi does a similar thing. And you've got to think about how these pieces are secured, what kind of things, such as VPNs, you're using to secure the data, and making sure that everything is secure as possible. They're whole new challenges, and you've got to make sure that you're addressing these. Another piece of this is the confidentiality challenge. This goes part and parcel with security. One of the problems is people working at home have a whole new set of ears listening to them, whether it's kids, family members. These are involved in conversations that may be confidential. If you're involved in healthcare, in the legal space, or even just in contract negotiations, this may be a real challenge. Even worse, there are devices strewn all over the average household today that all have microphones that are recording back to cloud services. Things like Amazon Echo, Apple Siri, the Google Assistant are all listening and recording and connecting. And so this could be a very, very concerning situation in the home presence when you're doing work there. So that's something to think about. You know, if you have a smart television, whether or not you even use it this way, it's almost certainly got a microphone and a connection, and it's probably recording little snippets of words to make sure that it's not missing you saying, "Okay, Google," or asking for Siri or asking for Alexa. And they're recording those, and they can record a lot of other things. So these are new concerns that you have to think about and consider as your workers are working at home. And then the final thing we want to mention is equipment. Especially in our telephony space, there's a lot of specialized equipment, whether it just be something as simple as headsets, cameras, voice over IP phones, or the power supplies that make them operate. And the problem with all of these is that equipment is limited. You may have already had enough to get people working at home, but as you go on, either add employees, you have failures, replacements, a lot of this equipment is backordered. There's a lot of price gouging out here. We've seen prices on some of these things go to 3 to 4 times their pre-crisis prices. Pre-crisis prices. That's a lot. Probably not the best phrase, but it's amusing. So you have to figure that in and consider what's going on. May mean it takes longer to get equipment. It may mean that the equipment is more expensive. It can be a real problem there. So these are just a few of the things to consider as far as Toolset. You want to make sure and have the right solution. You want to make sure and have a reliable network connection and not leave it to the responsibility of the end employee to be all alone on that. You need to think about the security implications of putting people at home and think about the equipment involved as well. A lot going on there. But let's change the subject a little bit and talk a little more about how you can manage remote employees. If you've never worked in that environment before, it can be a very different one, very concerning one. And there are some things that you need to think about. The very first one is talking about work hours. We just talked a little while ago about how remote employees tend to work longer hours. They take up commute time, but honestly, they take up a lot more time than that. And one of the problems that the UN has seen is that remote workers tend to actually overwork. Now, this can be great as far as productivity, but it leads to worker burnout. It leads to people who are no longer doing as good a job, or maybe they're just shutting down completely. So as a manager, one of the first things you need to do is clearly set rules about work hours. Whether this is a rule about, hey, look, we're not going to have a no email space after 6 p.m. till 9 in the morning, or it's about number of hours. You need to talk with and clearly delineate what the workspace is so that people can be working effectively with it. You need to think about time zone issues. You know, if you have an office that's on the West Coast or an office on the East Coast, they're 3 hours different in time. And so somebody calling going, hey, I want to talk to you, may not have been a big deal when their phone was sitting in the office. But if you're trying to contact them via chat or a voice over IP connection at 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern, you're now calling somebody at 6 a.m. in the morning Pacific. And that can be a real issue. Somebody who lives in the mountain time zone, I can tell you that it really is. I've had people call me before, and I'm like, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Why are you calling? Some of the things to think about there. An important one to understand is you've got to come up with rules that make sense for your organization. You can then enforce them with different tool sets with the software itself. Make the software stop sending emails, stop sending phone calls during specific times. Make it stop notifying you on these smart devices we all carry that are always grabbing for our attention. Turn these things off so that people aren't distracted and all of a sudden are sitting at the dinner table, finally spending some time with their family, and then that notification comes in, which may not be important at all. So think about ways to limit this, because otherwise you're going to end up with burned out workers who are really not successful at all. One way to deal with this is to think about flexible scheduling. One of the advantages of putting people in a remote space is they're not tied to, oh, I have to go to the office at this time, and I have to be in the office at this time, and I have to leave the office at this time. You can work on the work when it needs to get done. So this needs to go very closely hand in hand with the restricting work hours. You need to figure out how to make flexible schedules work with making sure that people aren't working too much. But it can be a real benefit for everybody. There are some people who like to just work early in the morning or later at night. That works great for them. It can be a situation that people have those minor errands, medical appointments. Maybe they need to get their car's oil changed. Now it becomes a lot easier to do all of those things. And people aren't taking off work time for them. They're just using a flexible schedule. So this is beneficial to both the employer and the employee at the same time. One of the things that we do here at Vertical is we focus on goal accomplishment rather than work hours. It's not so much about if you work a 9 to 5 day, it's did you get the job done? If you can get the job done in 2 hours, that's fine. That's the important part. But one of the other parts about that is if you're going to be doing flexible schedule, you need to make sure you're communicating that out to the rest of the team, because people need to know when you're available and when you're not available. There's Toolset that can help with this as well. This is where that classic unified communications presence capability that those in my industry have been talking about for years, but here's the real value of it. So you can show people, I'm available, I'm not available, I'm out all day. So let everybody know who wants to be able to see that, look, I'm doing an appointment today, I'm going to be, my daughter's got a piano recital, whatever it is. Make sure you're communicating that out, because they can't just walk down the hall and peek their head into your office and see if you're there. You've got to change that a little bit. And that's just part of a wider discussion of keeping everybody up to date on what's going on, getting information about everyone. The number one fear of remote workers is that they don't know what's happening, that they're out of touch, that somebody didn't let them know because they didn't talk to anybody in the break room over coffee. So you need to think about, if you're going to be keeping remote workers remote, making sure that you've got policies that over-communicate, that provide as much information as possible. And this means that managers need to be communicating to their team members need to be communicating to the other team members, and departments need to be communicating to other departments. You need to know what's going on. If the accounting department is going to all be doing something on Tuesday, everybody needs to know about that, because they may have an accounting question and they might freak out when they can't get a hold of the accounting team. Here at Vertical, we spend a lot of time on this. We have a company knowledge base to share important information, the first place that people go to look when they've got questions. We've got a monthly internal newsletter that highlights what's going on, wins, new policy shifts, and all that kind of stuff. We have tech tool sets to allow people to chat back and forth, to see presence, and to have meetings like the one we're doing right now, and to generally be more in communication. For example, my team uses a daily morning 15-minute or less daily touch base just to say, hey, here's what I'm working on today, here's any problems or concerns. Let people know what's going on, so everyone's just aware. There's no possibility that you can over-communicate. My wife works for a museum here in Fort Collins, and they have one meeting every day where they spend about an hour just letting everybody in the museum talk. And then she has 2 to 3 other meetings during the week where the management team gets together and talks cross-departmentally. And sometimes it seems like they're communicating too much, but she would rather have that than have things go silent, not sure what's going on. So the other piece of this is the manager has to do their job well. They have to make sure that they understand how to supervise remote teams, because it's a very different process. If you're used to being very touchy-feely and just walking down and checking on people, talking to people in the break room or at lunch, running into people as they are going about their tasks. None of that applies anymore. You've got so much information that you're missing when you move to a remote environment. You don't see your team. You don't see their interactions. You don't see that people are jumping together in a conference room to talk about something or having a discussion in somebody's office. All of that information is gone, and you must be very intentional about figuring out how to fill those gaps. You've got to figure out how to replace informal ad hoc communications means with much more formal ones that you're intentionally doing. So let's think about some of the ways you can do that. Well, I just mentioned that with my team, we schedule a daily interaction just to touch base and give everyone a place to say something. Often, I said 15 minutes, but often that meeting can take 5 minutes. But it just makes sure everybody knows they have a space to do it. We also schedule a regular discussion of issues and concerns that allows people to know, hey, look, I have this thing. I want to talk one-on-one with my boss. I know that there's a space set aside for that, so we'll talk then. And it gives a place to be able to bring that up. But you can't just depend upon them to do that. You're going to have to do some of it yourself. You're going to have to push and not wait for it to just show up on its own. You also need to encourage informal talk between the rest of your team, because so much of the informal interaction is gone, as I said before. A couple minutes beforehand, a couple minutes after the meetings, encourage people just to say how they're doing, what's going on, what did they do this weekend, how are they, dealing with current circumstances. Try and encourage that kind of communication, because there are less avenues for it to happen on an ad hoc or just a surprise basis. You need to make sure and encourage it. One of the things that I've advised another leader that I was talking about whose team just moved at home, he was trying to understand how he was going to encourage this kind of thing, and he wasn't seeing that his team was really gelling with the remote experience. So I suggested he started showing up like 3 minutes late to every meeting. Not enough to be really annoying, but enough time to give people a chance to talk while they waited for him to show up. And the real goal here is to make sure that you are getting more information than you had before, because you're going to be behind the power curve. You're going to be missing out stuff. One of the ways to do this is to ask for feedback, to be explicit about it, to not just wait for people to tell you if things are going well, because you can't just see people's body language. You can't see if they're happy or sad. You can't tell if they're frustrated. You've got to ask for that stuff. You've got to be explicit and say, hey, how am I doing? How are you doing? How's the company doing? Or do you have concerns? And you need to do it on a regular basis. Even if the answer is always everything's great, you need to still keep on doing this. So this has got to be one of the most important things a manager can possibly do. The last thing I'll mention is talking about these kind of meetings, the ones we're doing right now, video conference. Everybody's doing many more video conferences than they've ever done before. Everybody is spending lots of time on this. And there are a few things that everybody can do, not just the leaders, to make sure that these are working. So one of them is to make sure that you're present in the conversation. Make sure that you're actually engaged and listening to what's going on. The number of people who are doing things on 6 different devices at once, and they're like, oh, wait, did somebody say my name? Huh? The most common way to see this is when you can't remember to turn mute off, because you should always have mute on at this point. Most people do it. That's great. But if you can't remember to turn it off, it means that you were probably thinking about something completely different and not engaged. So when you see that in yourself, start realizing you're not being present in the meeting. Now, the flip side of this is to not schedule meetings that don't really involve people. If somebody's just getting a meeting to hear what everybody else is saying, and they're not actually engaged or involved in having to talk about, make decisions, have input, then that's going to drive people to not be present in the meeting. So the people holding the meetings need to think about what they're doing here. I mentioned a moment ago, people forgetting to turn off mute. Another thing you need to do is be more accepting. Be accepting of the fact that people are going to have dogs barking in the background, or maybe a kid walks into the video conferencing, or your spouse shows up half naked in the back of the frame. Yes, it's going to all happen to us. We've seen the cute videos, but sometimes that's going to be us, and we're going to be mortified and embarrassed. So the work conditions are more challenging. Some people are squeezed into spaces where they don't have a separate office, or they don't have an appropriate space, and they're sharing with the rest of their family. Be accepting of what's going on. let people make mistakes, laugh at it, and use it as a moment to just engage with each other. Another thing to do is to be engaged. Offer opinions. When people ask questions, don't just let silence linger. Get in there and ask questions themselves. A perfect example of being accepting is the fact that somebody just turned on the microphone in this meeting right now, and we're hearing a bunch of background noise. That's okay. We'll all get by it. And then the last thing is to be a leader. And what I mean by that is when you are going to be presenting, whether you're the person who set up the meeting or you're just one person who's going to be part of it, make the extra effort. Get there early. Make sure all your technology works. Make sure you've gone through everything you're going to be talking about. Make sure you've done some extra research. Think about questions people might have and be ready to answer those. Make that extra effort because you're not in the room anymore. You're not sitting with everybody. You've got to try harder to present effectively and to make other people be present, to make them engaged with you. That's part of your responsibility when you're the person talking. So I've talked a heck of a lot. Let me go ahead and hand this off to some of the other members of our team so that they can talk a little bit and tell you a little bit more about how to be successful doing it.
Thanks, Kevin. This is Fran Blackburn. And when you're working remotely, it's still important to have a plan, and it's still important to work your plan. There are several things that Kevin mentioned that I'll give you some examples of and using the technology. The first one is setting goals. So that's very important when you do have that plan. You need to understand what your day is going to look like and what do you need to accomplish today. What do you need to do going forward? What are the challenges that you might have? So after you have your goals set, you'll need to establish a routine. Have you ever heard the speech by that Navy SEAL? If you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. It's one of those you can search on, and it's really important. If you can finish that first task of the day, and Kevin probably realizes this more than I do, having been in the military, but you finish that first task of the day, and it's like, okay, you're ready for the next task. You're ready to keep rolling. If you had kids at home, they're on a regular schedule. If they went off to school, that was an easier time to get rolling, and you had a specific schedule and things that had to be finished. Now you may have to homeschool them, get them ready for the day, get them focused on something, whatever their project might be. So it's really important to understand what the schedule is and how to get it rolling. I'm more of a nocturnal person, and if I can get going in the morning, I'll just keep going all the time. As far as a routine during the day and diving in, it's just an easier process, easier to get into it. I worked with a woman that she didn't have kids. She worked at home, and she made a point to run an errand early in the morning. And then when she arrived home, she was at her office, her home office, ready to go. If she didn't have an errand, she would even get in the car, drive around the block, and come back, and she was at the office. So whatever works, whatever helps you get going. So next, I'd recommend setting targets for your work and your work-life balance. So that can be a challenge as well. When you love what you're doing and you're focused or you've got a heavy workload, it's really a challenge to walk away from your work. So you need to make sure that you have that balance. You can be able to accomplish what you want to do in your personal life and in your work life and figure out that mix that works for you. Because now that you're at home, it might be a different situation. For me, it's kind of evolved over the years. Different things have happened and the environment has changed. Kids at home, kids not at home, and you adapt as you go. So depending on what you're doing and depending on the situation, your whole work life might change. So another tip is to figure out when it's time to stop working. So I know that I'm very guilty of this. There was a time when I would disappear down to the lower level and feed the dogs and not come back upstairs. Well, the kids knew to find me in my office, and I would always end up there. So I had to work on that work-life balance piece of it to know when to stop working. What really worked for me is to designate a work area and a room location. So I have a specific office, and it's an area where I work, and it's separate from the rest of the house. It's an opportunity, if you can do it, to designate a specific workspace. Unless you're a writer or on the Hallmark Channel, you probably don't have one of those reclining laptop holders. So it's kind of interesting to see people on TV when they do that, because you can't do that for very long before your back hurts. It's an opportunity to make sure that you have a separate area, and if it's If it's the dining room during the day and then the dining room becomes the dining room during meal times, that's okay too. But designate that area and get that specific work location set up. So that'll help you focus on dividing your workspace from your personal space. It'll be free from distractions and everything else that you need to do. It makes it just a whole lot easier to work. In fact, it's really interesting. The picture with the dogs, they are talking about training not only your family, but your dogs are part of your family too. It could be your cats. I'm not sure about cats so much because I don't have cats, but the dogs definitely know my schedule. And when I come in and I'm on the phone, they know not to make any noise. I have Alaskan Malamutes and they make a lot of noise. And sometimes they interrupt, but for the most part, they're pretty quiet when I'm on the phone. When I'm on a speakerphone, they don't really know that I'm on the phone. And when they're outside, they don't quite understand. But when I lower that blind at the end of the day, they know, oh, she lowered the blind. Okay, it's time for us to eat. Or if I'm too late, they'll come in and tell me about it. But it's pretty incredible. The family and your animals, your parents, anyone will understand your schedule and what you're doing. In fact, I even had a sign up when there are certain meetings that I couldn't be interrupted in. But it's a good schedule to get going with. As far as an opportunity to leverage the tools and the technologies and resources, you need to be sensitive to schedules and your approach to communication. Reach out and respond using the right tool. Kevin mentioned a whole bunch of different tools, and depending on if it's a quick conversation, if it's urgent, it might be a phone or a text. If it's quick and it can wait, you might put a message in chat. You might have a regular information exchange. Maybe you want to put something in a workroom so that you can share ideas. If it's a lengthy conversation where there are several people involved, maybe you want to use email. If there's a lot of people on that email list, be careful not to reply all in the wrong places. So you also want to use the tools and you want to use them appropriately. If you have brainstorm sharing ideas, opportunities to share information with colleagues and other folks, use the meeting room tool. You can go in, share an idea, zap in, zap out, and it's amazing the kind of sharing and brainstorming that you can do with a tool like that. And as Kevin mentioned, absolutely, when joining a meeting, use video, be present, make sure that you're there and they know what's happening, where you are. It's very critical that people know that their information is important. So also keep in mind that when using different sorts of tools like email, that emotion is difficult to put across. If you're in email, you might not be able to read that. If it's video, absolutely. Try to be sensitive to where you're telling jokes and whether they're funny or not. Because if it's on email, it may not be so funny. If you're not sure, pick up the phone and call. Talk to somebody. As far as the reply all that I mentioned earlier, if you're the sender and you want to use it on, send it to a lot of people, you can also use the BCC on the email. The BCC on the email. You can share it to everybody, and then if somebody replies all, it just comes back to you. So there are great tools, and sometimes just a little bit of technique helps a lot. And if you're not sure, ask. In the old days when people were in the office and you could just kind of, lean through the next office or walk down the hall and say, hey, how did this work? Or are you using this now? You can't do that anymore, but there are tools where you can either pick up the phone if you want to, or send a text, send an email. Hey, how are you doing this? You can still share best practices. So shifting gears a little bit and engaging remote people. We've done it several different ways. We've been creative in different areas. And if you find mutual interests, they can be light and quick exchanges. I mentioned that I'm an owner of, I say alcoholics, of Alaskan Malamutes, but I'm a member of a site called Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's easy just to pop in and pop out. If your dog's doing something goofy and it lightens somebody else's day, it just improves everybody's day. And you can, again, brainstorm ideas. You have an something, you can also do that in a quick way. As far as using the right method and posting on a site, make sure that you are clear and you're concise. If you're not sure, reread it, walk away, and come back. Just an opportunity to use the tool and make sure you have that message sent appropriately. Sometimes that new programs will evolve depending on engagement. And one of the things that we've done recently, Rebecca and I have started sharing photos on Fridays. And so calling it Photo Friday. And it just kind of evolved because it was like, oh, something happened. And we showed a picture. And this is the picture of what we were talking about. And it at one point even became plants. We can talk about the different plants. We can make it quick and easy. Doesn't take a lot of time, but yet you're engaged. Again, something that Kevin was talking about, just some quick engagement and making everybody feel included. We also have named a couple programs based on brainstorming and sharing ideas and that sort of thing. And we did that in a room, in one of our rooms, just ideas back and forth. One of the organizations I belong to has fireside chats. People gather on video to share information. And a lot of people have varied schedules. They can pop in, they can pop out, different interests, different engagement levels. There might be, different approaches that you can take, but a lot of times you can be creative and have some fun with it. Depending on, let's say you've got a sales organization or you have an event, let's say you've got a holiday. Kevin talked about people talking about what's happening on the weekends, those sorts of things. And you might want to come up with something special for your group, depending on what that might be. I worked for a CEO that said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it. You have dogs barking, you have emergencies. The way I'm situated, hopefully nobody walks behind me anymore, which is really a good thing. Horses might run by your window and you'll be surprised because that's not typical for you. But as far as everybody working at home now, people are expecting those distractions. Something happens, the kids are home, the family's a little bit different right now, and it does happen. So, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. So it's really a different world. So I would also recommend that you set up your communication for your distractions. So I also had a little sign for my kids when they were here. And when video first came about, I would put it on the front of my desk. So when they came down in the summertime, say it's 4 p.m, and they're back from whatever they were doing, I've got a sign up that says, can't talk now. And then watch for the little sign. If it wasn't up, they could come, blasting in and tell me what they just came back from, which was kind of fun. So, again, over the years that's evolved. And with video and our technology, the whole thing has evolved. It's pretty incredible. It's actually a lot of fun. It's not so different from working in an office now. The difference with us now is not being able to travel very much, which is kind of a challenge. But as far as the technology, set it up correctly, and it's incredible. As far as the interruptions that I mentioned with the dogs, it's not critical that somebody on the other end, doesn't hear your dogs. It's a matter of they don't get too interrupted. You want to make sure that the meeting continues and you continue with your meeting. A lot of times my dogs, as I mentioned, would go on cues. And over time, when you set up your office, set up your schedule, set up your goals, they get in tune with you. Whether it's your family, your animals, anybody that's around, you get yourself scheduled and you get your whole family and your organization within your house schedule as well. I'd also recommend that if you live alone, schedule a time for a quick reach out to a friend or a coworker. You'll be more engaged when you come back, and being able to have that connection, come back, you might even have another idea on what you want to do. Most of us also work at home on a computer. That's typically what we do. And so many of us do this, and when we sit and we don't get up and move. The most important thing is to make sure that you cover your health. You're going to get up and move. You're going to make sure that you do eat during the day. There are a lot of times I would forget to do that too, and it was kind of funny. My husband would bring me some frozen lunches, and I keep them in the freezer. And over the years, he would say, well, do you want me to put them in the freezer downstairs? I'm like, oh, no, put them upstairs. I want to go out to lunch. So, you work on different strategies and things that work for you. But take the time to get up and move. But most importantly, remember to come back. Go move and come back. So those were some of the ideas that I would have for you. And, as the technology evolves, leverage it. If you have questions, absolutely reach out and brainstorm a little bit. If you have ideas for us on other things we can do, I'd love to hear that too. So I'm going to pass that along on how to get along at home with Rebecca.
Okay, this is Rebecca Ward, and I'm just going to go through a few things that have really helped me throughout the years as I've moved from into an office to home, back to an office to home, all the things that have made it a little bit easier. The first thing is how to transition to a remote mindset. At the end of the day, it's different. When you're at home, it is not about what everybody else is doing. It's about what you're doing. So the very first thing to do is to really start talking. It is incredibly easy to feel isolated when you're working from home, even if you have occasional meetings with your coworkers or you have other things that you're doing. So the first thing that you need to do is just start networking. Don't ever be afraid to reach out to your coworkers. If you have a question about something, call them, chat them. Even if you just want to say, oh, this crazy thing happened to me this weekend and I really want to tell somebody, don't ever hesitate to do that, because you need that social interaction to feel like you're part of a team and that you're not alone all the time. This relates to something that Fran had said about our photo Fridays that we do every week. Fran started this a while ago, and that's where we send the photos back and forth of the dogs and the plants, and it's been incredibly helpful to us. Fran and I work 2 hours away from each other. We've only actually met a handful of times, but this weekly engagement, and of course we talk every day outside of that, but this is just an extra special little thing that helps us have a separate friendship outside of that, as well as to make sure that we never feel isolated. I still get photos from her late Friday night sometimes, maybe even on Saturday if she sees something, or on any other day of the week. And it's just a nice way to have a friend at work, even though you're at home. So don't hesitate to talk to people. As Fran also said, always reach out to people on a different chat, call your mom at lunch, do any of those things so you can feel like you're around people. You can also really focus on being available. When you're in an office, anybody can poke their head over your cube. They can knock on your office door. They can just say, hey, as they're walking by, or I need to ask you a question about this project. But when you're at home, that's not really possible. And it's not just other people needing to respond to you. You also need to create your own open door policy. It is so easy to get sucked into your work and your work schedule, and then you don't respond to email, or you ignore calls, or you're unresponsive to chats. But when you're at home, you really have to focus a lot more on those things so you can be a really effective part of your team. However, for some people, it's really hard for them to just hop from working on a project over to an email or pick up a phone call or anything like that. So if you aren't able to transition your thoughts that quickly, then just set up a schedule for yourself. Say, maybe I'm going to respond to emails and voicemails twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. Or make it a standard thing that you will hold off on email, but you'll always be really responsive with chat, because chat is quick. You can answer a question in just 30 seconds. So just figure out what a schedule would be that would work for you, but also communicate that to your team. If they don't understand that you need to focus on something, then they're just going to hound you, or they're going to think that you're not working as much as they're working or getting things done or any of those things. So just be really clear. If you have some things that you need to do, or you need to set a really firm schedule about how you respond, tell people. Say, I am really, really underwater with this project and I'm going to spend the entire day working on it. Can we talk about that tomorrow? Or just tell them on a day-to-day basis of what that would look like. And the next part is really to know yourself. And I know that that sounds really odd because we all think that we know ourselves, but knowing how you work is different. And knowing how you work from home is even more different than the way you would work from an office. When you're in an office, a lot of other people drive all of your activity. There are people saying, I want to meet with you at this time. A lot of meetings, a lot of in-person meetings. Maybe people saying this is the exact time that you go to lunch. This is when we take breaks, any of those things. But when you're at home, that structure is more about what you would do personally. Of course, you still have lunch. Of course, you still have meetings. You have all of those things, but it's more on your own terms of how it would work. So it's very important to understand yourself, what works for you, what motivates you, and that might take some time to figure out. It certainly took me some time to figure out. A really good example is that I am the worst morning person. If I could not talk to anybody before 11 a.m., that would be fantastic. That being said, right now it's obviously before 11 a.m. I work in the corporate world. I can't tell people that I'm just not going to work until that point. Even with flexible scheduling, it's just not going to work out for the things that I personally need to do. So when I'm scheduling my days, I take into effect that I'm a little bit slower in the morning, and I think and look at my schedule and I say, oh, this task is a lot easier. This is a task that maybe is designing a landing page, or maybe I need to edit a document, or maybe have a quick call with somebody. I can do those things in the morning, and that's a little bit easier for me. I know that I'm going to be far more energetic and think a lot better in the afternoon, so I'll save all of my projects that need a lot of focus or a lot of brain power or problem solving, and I'll do all of those in the afternoon. And that really works for me. Other people, it might be the opposite. Perhaps you are a morning person, just really hammering things out at 6 a.m. is what works for you. But just try some different things to see what works. You have control over it, and just let other people know, experiment, and move forward. Another thing that can be really difficult in a remote setting is staying motivated and organized. Again, when you're in an office, some of those motivations come externally. There are other people there saying, hey, where's that project? Or looking over your shoulder. And things that you probably don't even realize are happening. But when you're at home, there is no one looking over your shoulder. It's up to you to make sure that you are dedicated, you're motivated, and that you get all of your work done. And there are actually a lot of good ways to do that. And the first way is one that Fran already said. It's about taking a break. Sometimes taking a little break, just 5, 10, 15 minutes, can really boost your creativity. It can increase your productivity, and all of a sudden your habits are better and your mental health is better. So maybe that's just going and getting a glass of water or taking a walk around the block. Maybe it's putting in a load of laundry, give your dogs a hug, whatever it is that you need to do. But when you come back, you might be able to re-tackle whatever problem that you're having, or just even feel like you're more ready to approach the day. Another thing that I often do is just change my venue. Sometimes I'll be sitting and I'll be staring at my screen, and for whatever reason, something just seems impossible. Have you ever stared at a word on the screen and all of a sudden, originally it seemed like it was spelled right, but the longer you stare at it, the more and more confusing it gets? It's kind of a project like that. You're sitting there and you just can't shift your brain. Just getting up and moving somewhere else can make a huge difference. For me, it's the difference between sitting at my desk where I'm staring at my monitors to picking up my laptop, walking 10 feet across the room, and sitting down on my couch with my laptop. Moving from one place to another shifts whatever, I don't even know what's happening in that moment. Whatever's happening that I can't focus out of it, moving, taking my stuff to a different location is a big help. I know a lot of people that will go on walking meetings. They'll, pick up their phone, they'll go outside. Maybe you'll even go outside and you'll sit in your hammock during a meeting. Anything that you need to do just to change your venue and change the thoughts that you're having so that you can be more productive. And then next up is consider time blocking. Time blocking is something that I've heard referenced, throughout my career at different companies, and it's been used in different ways. And time blocking is really, if you're not familiar, where you just take everything that's on your schedule and you block off the hours that you'll need for those things on your calendar. The way that I use that at home is if I'm feeling like I am just not getting through a task and I'm trying, but for whatever reason, I'm just not getting there, I'll time block it out. I'll say tomorrow I am spending this amount of time on this and I'm getting it done because it has to be done. I'm just not making it a priority for whatever reason. Or on the other side, if I'm feeling really, really stressed out, for whatever reason, my task list seems like there are a lot of things to do, so many things to tackle. How am I ever going to get it done? I just sit down and I time block it out for the next day. And I say, these are the things that I'm going to do. And this is about how much time it will make. And the next thing I know, everything is okay and I've moved through it all and I'm on to the next thing. So those are some really great ways to keep yourself going when you're at home by yourself. And then another thing that people don't really think about when they're moving to a remote workforce is how you communicate differently when you're at home. We've already kind of talked about the technology piece, about how we need to use different forms of communication with email and phone and video and chat, but there are other things that you need to do to really communicate well with different personality types when you're at home, because we're all very, very different, and the way that we do those things is different too. So my first recommendation is always to pay attention to how other people prefer to communicate. How they're reaching out to you is always a really good indicator. Is someone never emailing you but always chatting with you? That's probably the best way to get in touch with them if you need something. Or on the flip side, maybe they never check their chat. You can never see their little icon light up that they're there. They might not ever even be on chat. So focus on a different way to get in touch with them. Keep in mind that you might need to try different approaches with this. Everybody's different. Everybody does things differently. So try different things to see how they respond to you. And if you're seeing that people don't respond to you in certain ways, try one of those other things. Make sure to note all of their response times. If you're chatting them and they're not responding for an hour, that might not be the right way to do it. Or if you're calling them and they never ever get back to you but respond to you with an email, that's probably a pretty good indicator too. You also really need to be attentive to how your coworkers ask to be communicated with. I've noticed that a lot of people will say, oh, Rebecca, I don't really prefer this, but there are other people who do it. Rebecca, you really prefer to be communicated with email. And I'm like, oh, yes, I prefer that. But to them, that's not really a recommendation. So they're not really going to do it. They're going to do something else. But if somebody asks you and says, this is really best for me, follow that. They're giving you a clear-cut way to get in touch with them. And you're going to get along so much better because you're doing exactly what they say that you want to do. And then also pay attention to those nonverbal cues. How do they sound when you hear from them? Do they sound happy that you've been reaching out to them and in touch with them? Do they sound like they want to help you? Are they quick to respond? Make sure that you pay attention to those things. And if they always sound a little unhappy, you might need to change your approach. It's also really important to read in between the lines. And this refers a little bit more to email, but when you're looking at the way people communicate with you, take that into account. For instance, when you send somebody an email, are they only responding to the very first sentence that you're sending them? You might be sending them too much information at once. Some people just don't dig in to an entire email. On the other side, if it's a really short email and people are confused and they're asking questions, you might need to give a little bit more information up front, or maybe even give them a call because it's just not being communicated in that email. It's also important to look at the type of communications they send. So if they're sending you an email that's 2 words, that's probably as much as you really need to do. So there are some people that I know are always incredibly concise when they email. So I'm trying to get whatever I'm asking them into 2 sentences. I don't want them to have to read further than that. Obviously, they're busy and they don't want to spend a lot of time on email. And then once again, note those response times. If they take too long, reach out again. You might need to try a different method, as I also already mentioned, but also try compiling some things and learning about the way different people interact. I have a coworker here at Vertical who it is like clockwork. If I email him, he will never, ever, ever respond to the first email. I don't think I've ever received a response from a first email from him. But if I wait 2 days and then respond to him first thing in the morning and email him again and say, I need this by this time, he responds immediately. And that's just the way he communicates. And I could tell you a story about a lot of different people here at Vertical, just over time realizing the best way that they communicate and then trying to use that over and over again so that we can be even better at communicating and getting our jobs done. And the final most important part of this is to ask for help. We are all so different. We communicate different. We hear things differently. We're just different. That's all that you can say about it. And so that also means that some people may understand how to work with somebody better, or they've had a different experience. So if you're not able to get in touch with someone, or you're not having very good communications with them, maybe you're not understanding them, maybe you feel like you're just kind of missing each other, you're 2 ships in the night, ask for help. Maybe your coworker can say, oh, you know, when I was talking to John, I really noticed that he responded really, really well for this. So try that next time. Or maybe they'll say, actually, I have a meeting coming up with them in 10 minutes. Let me just get on a call with them really quick and I'll let you know what they say. So your team is here for you. They can help you communicate better every day in different ways, and make sure that you ask them for help, and I'm sure they'll ask you for help too. And that is actually everything that I have to say today. We've all had a lot of information coming through from Fran and Kevin and I. If you have any questions, enter it into the chat box on the lower left hand of the screen, and we'll get to it.